limit, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
We are bringing on to the show Miguel Angel Angeles, who is a journalist who has collaborated with Mexican media such as Vogue, Rolling Stone, Milenio, Aire, Libre, and currently at ADN40 and Heraldo Radio. Welcome, Miguel. Hi, Mikey.
How are you?
All right,
Hi,
I
how
know
are
you
you?
as Mikey. Good, you?
I'm so happy to be here with you. I love the Katie Halper show, and
Thank
it's an
you.
honor to be invited.
And we're also being joined by José Luis Granados Ceja, who is a writer and photojournalist based in Mexico City. He previously worked as a staff writer for Telesur and currently works as a freelancer whose stories focus on contemporary political issues, particularly those that involve grassroots efforts to affect social change. And he often covers the work of social and labor movements in Latin America. So, welcome, José Luis.
Hello, it's really good to be
Hi.
here.
Thank you so much
Likewise,
for
big
joining.
fan of the show. I'm so
Oh,
glad
thank
to be
you.
invited. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I want to ask both of you to put the election of Claudia Sheinbaum into context. Is this a victory? Is this an unmitigated victory? Is this a victory with certain limitations? How do you see what just happened? And I should add, by the way, she made history. She's the first woman to become president of Mexico and the first Jewish person to become president of Mexico.
Not only in Mexico, Katie, in North America.
It could have been me, but she beat me. So.
I think that it's definitely a victory in terms of political representation. We and in this case, Jose Luis won. I don't think he will deny what I'm going to say, but the woman movement, the feminism fourth wave, as it's been called, that started back many years ago, but in 2020 had kind of an impressive uh, way of a repercussion. This movement has been making us in Mexican society that you may know it's a very classist and machist, the macho culture is something that we deal all the time with. We're still the country that 11 women are beaten and death every single day. The fact that a woman it's becoming the first president in North America, it's not even the state
right.
has ever had a woman as a president. So I may say this is a victory. We cannot say anything about that, but there's a lot of things that we can actually, let's say, discuss about of things that she has done, things that she may have on her agenda, and question from the society, that she must have to acknowledge at some point, and that at the moment she hasn't been able to do so, maybe for political reasons. But basically, for me, it's a victory.
Absolutely. I mean, it's undeniable. I think the significance of that. I was actually speaking with the person who played the role helping to organize young women in her campaign the night of the election. And she told me that, this is a tribute to our great grandmothers, our grandmothers, that not only are women being elected into political office, but actually being elected into the highest office of the land. But I would actually highlight her political program. I think it's one thing for a woman to be elected, and absolutely in a country like Miguel Angel told us about is very much still dealing with a lot of sexist macho kind of attitudes. But in this election, it was actually pretty much boiled down to two women. In fact, we had the government bloc, the pro-government bloc, the Moreno-led coalition, as represented by Claudia Sheinbaum, and then on the opposition right-wing coalition by Xochitl Galvez. So there was a third candidate, Jorge Alvarez Mañez, but he was always a distant third. It was not
never
existed. But between these two, I think the point that I would highlight is this is a woman who represents a movement that has very much successfully transformed Mexico. It wasn't just a squeaker of a victory; it was an overwhelming victory. In fact, Morena, the party that is in power now, that Claudia Sheinbaum belongs to, had proposed the possibility of winning a supermajority in order to engage in deep reforms of the country to continue what the current president calls the fourth transformation of Mexico. And they succeeded. And I think even that surprised some of the people within the party. It was always kind of talked about as a possibility, but actually definitely in the lower house of Congress, they've secured that supermajority. And that speaks to the level of support that exists in this country. It's undeniable. She beat her rival by 2-1 margin. So there is very enthusiastic support for Morena in this party. And very briefly, I'd like to say why. We've seen a dramatic increase in the quality of life of working class people, of the poor, of the campesinos, a sharp increase in the minimum wage. We've seen 5 million people lifted out of poverty in the last 3 years. We've seen the reinvestment of the country's natural resources into the population. And I think that in a lot of ways helps explain why we had the result that we saw on Sunday, of having this monumentous victory that very much consolidates a new regime in Mexico. I think oftentimes elections, there can be a change in office. Here in Mexico, we talk about the modern democratic history of Mexico, where in the year 2000, the 71-year rule of the Institutional Revolutionary Party was ended by the election of Vicente Fox. But that democratic transition, unfortunately, didn't actually translate into a lot of differences for the vast majority of the country. And whereas in 2018, and now we're seeing in 2024, the population feels that these political representatives, as represented by Morena, are actually engaging in that transformation. I think that's the key thing I would highlight. Not just a woman, but a woman on a progressive platform that did a really good job as mayor of Mexico City, and we hope will do a good job as president of the country.
She ran on also being like AMLO's predecessor, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, AMLO played a big role in this election. It was very much, I wouldn't say it was like a referendum on López Obrador, but definitely that was the key thing. Do people want to continue with that political program, or do people want to vote for the opposition and go back to the previous regime? And then we see the result that they clearly chose to continue the fourth transformation of Mexico.
And that's something that what José Luis is mentioning about the role that the President AMLO let's say, performed during this election is something to analyze, because the way Claudia Sheinbaum represents him has been very criticized. Like, she has been openly criticized because some people have called something that I consider is very misogynistic, to call her like a copy of the president. Lots of critics towards the way she looks, lots of credit, the classical way to critic women, not about the way she performs political work or she does things, but the way she dresses up. But at the same time, she has been very open to say, yes, this is I cannot say that I'm not going to continue that, because I believe in what AMLO represents.
And AMLO is Andrés Manuel López Obrador. So for people who don't know, that's like his nickname, because that's what his name spells. And he's the president. He's stepping down as president. Yeah.
Exactly. One of the things that have been very criticized, and that would probably be one of these complaints, those official complaints that the opposition will do to the National Electoral Institute, will be that he made a lot of interventions in the elections that are not legal, that were like violations to the ruling. There were things that the president himself complained about when he was like competing for the position in 2006 and in 2012, and then in 2018. Let's remember, he was like, for me, this was the first election that I did without having him on the electoral ballot. Now, the fact that Claudia Sheinbaum comes with a lot of important things to highlight. I completely agree. I pretty much agree with all the things that José Luis said, but then at the same time, I think it's way more complex than only saying that this is completely kind of a good scenario. It is a good scenario in many ways. The minimum wage going up, it's very good. It's something that we waited for many years. But it also puts our democracy in a context that's going to be very complex, and we're going to have to analyze. First of all, the opposition and the way they're not able to understand how much Mexico wanted a party that represented them. Not only a party, I was just remembered this Pew Research Center study that was published, I remember, maybe in March this year, or maybe, I don't remember, in October or March of this year. And they did this research last year, and the results were terrific, because the majority of Mexican people that were interviewed like that were completely agreeing with the fact that they would want that there would be no obstacles when the president would propose something in order to change not only the constitution, but also to make some different and important decisions decisions towards the way we work as a country. If you analyze that, as tough as it is, it's like, what are we considering democracy right now? that the president and the people in power can do whatever they want without having kind of a real conversation. Is that good for a democracy? I disagree with that, But at the same time, it's completely reasonable that people is tired of that, because the opposition had 6 years to make a reflection, to say what happened here, what we did wrong, what's not working for people, why we have this crisis of representation, what are we going to do? And we didn't do it. And then Xochitl Galvez happens to be this very charismatic woman that was a senator, and that happens to appear last year as a let's say a star in the horizon, and the position was expecting her to do in 8 months what they didn't do in 6 years. And then now we have this, just to give you a number, 33 million people voted for Claudia Sheinbaum. They decided that even though we are facing a crisis in security, we are not like it's a problem to have the militarization is itself. And you, Katie, and I, you have been both working in stories with people in Mexico that are against with the fact that Mexico is a militarized country right after the war on drugs that Felipe Calderon implemented, that we're facing the problem about violence towards women, that we're facing the problem that Pemex, the national fuel company, is no longer an institution that gives money to the country, even though that for them, even though all those scenarios, and I can mention you many of, like, let's say, like the way Tren Maya has been facing a lot of complaints and a lot of research and investigation, the way it's damaging the ecosystems, the cenotes in the country. Even though of that, they decided the best way to go is to keep going with the self-called for transformation. And that is very representative of the country, of the complex country we are now.
I definitely agree with Miguel on that. I think the opposition seemed to never really be able to understand what happened in 2018. And even looking at the reaction now, they still seem to want to blame everybody but themselves about the result, or kind of go to these cheap answers saying, well, it's because they receive social programs. Now, the social programs obviously are a big deal here. We've seen a dramatic increase in the direct cash for transfer programs. We're talking universal pension for seniors, supports for students, supports for people living in the countryside. It's called Sembrando Vida, so that they plant trees. Now, there's been this or that issue with some of these programs, but I think a lot of it isn't even so much about the state redistributing wealth directly into the pockets of the people, although that is important. I've talked to a lot of senior citizens who really highlight what it means. It means they can afford their medicines. It means they can go out with their grandkids to dinner and things like that, stuff that was really difficult when you're living on the edge of poverty or in extreme poverty. But actually, I think a lot of it is that we were talking about the crisis of democracy, the fact that, we had a change in power and it didn't really result in differences in people's lives in a material way. But with López Obrador and these social programs, which something about 7 or 8 out of 10 households receive at least one social program. So it's a massive breach. Is that it's a dignification, right? It's they feel seen. There's a lot of voices that are sympathetic to the opposition here in Mexico, and they've been talking about how they can't believe that the country would go down this path again, that it took so long to get rid of the pre-dictatorship, and they're trying to make it seem like it's the return to authoritarianism. I highly disagree with that take, but I think they need to study to understand, why did the democratic system actually not have a lot of faith in the population? There was a Gallup poll that came out very recently, and in a single term, basically under the leadership of López Obrador, people's faith in their own institutions, in the democracy, has been restored, because they feel seen, because they feel attended. They had been ignored, they were marginalized. And many of these voices, like I said, that are sympathetic to the opposition, continue to want to claim that, they're just easily bought, it's just the money. No, I think there's a lot to be said about actually feeling represented for the first time. And López Obrador, maybe Miguel will agree here, even if you like him or not, he's a political animal, right? He's very, very good at outsmarting his opponents. he's said to have visited every municipality in the country at least twice. So quite literally having that direct contact with the people. He has this morning press conference every day, Monday to Friday, 2 hours long. So that kind of direct connection. It'll be interesting to see what Claudia does in that place. Will she continue this kind of communication strategy? But I think that's a lot of it, of feeling represented, feeling reflected in the policies of the government. And, there was a letter that came out right before the election from cultural activists, writers who were critical of the Morena-led government. And one of them, Héctor Aguilar Camín, said, "Oh, we miss the apapachos," or like the embracing, the caring that we used to receive from previous governments. And a lot of people that that support Morena jumped on that, saying, what they want is they want to be the center of attention. They want to have direct access to power, to receive funding directly from the state. And instead, now that funding goes to the population. And then I think if the opposition was honest and said, this is the reason why we are not receiving support anymore, they maybe would have done better. There's only so far a charismatic figure can actually get you. And as we saw, you didn't get them very far in this election.
But I would like to go back to something that José Luis said, Katie. It's the word narrative, about it. It's like when you say something like that money, instead of going to intellectuals like Héctor Aguilar, it goes back to the people. That is something that we cannot deny, and I agree with José Luis. Is like he's not only López Obrador is not only a political animal. He's the most charismatic president we've ever had, and in case you hate him, you love to hate him. It's the people who want to hate, and he can make you get angry. I personally have I'm very critical of him, but I totally understand, and I'm aware about the way he works. He says the money is going back to the people, but he hasn't been able to make things transparent. He hasn't been able. He's been covering lots of information that we need to know, like the way the money used for the Tren Maya has been spent. We cannot know that because he decided that it's going to be filed for 5 years because he considers that's national security issue. That's something he hasn't been able to answer. All the concerns about the way his sons have been like part of lots of investigations and research related to corruption things. There are lots of recordings that involve them, and he just says no. And you know what happens? His charisma and the power and the way people believe in him has been making these electoral seasons so complicated. The problem in the opposition, Katie, the opposition not blind completely to the situation in the country, the way it reacts less. Yesterday was terrible to read the reactions in social media, people saying, so now on I won't give a tip to the waiters and waitresses in the restaurants. Now on, I'm not going to give money to the people that work in the streets, to the Viene, that is the guy that helps you. We have a lot of info. We have a huge problem of non-formal jobs in the street, and the guy that helps you park your car, it's called the Viene, and we're not going to tip them, we're not going to give money to them, we're not going to help people that suffer from natural disasters, because if you voted for Morena, now Morena has to help you. And that is the level of analysis that a lot of people that belongs to the opposition has.
And the opposition, just for shorthand, is right-wing opposition.
Yeah, kind of, but at the same time, there's a lot of discussion about it. Can you call a leftist movement that is like supporting the militarization of the country? I don't know. I don't think we should call it like a left movement, to be honest. I could not call it like one of the things that we criticized a lot to the president was the way he decided to cancel all the how you say estancias infantiles, the
daycare facilities.
The daycare facilities from the beginning, because he said grandmothers are there to help the grandchildren. Do you consider that as a leftist?
Yeah, what was that, Jose Luis? What is your response to that? Because I'm a little protective, and I cut a lot of slack to leftists who are corrupt, because I'm like, well, I'd rather a leftist who's corrupt than a rightist who's corrupt. But that thing was weird to me, the daycare facility. But what is your response to what Mikey said in general, and then also the daycare facility question?
Yeah, well, I'll jump on the daycare thing first. The thing about the daycares is that it was a very inefficient regime that previously existed that basically handed over money to private entities that take care of running daycare facilities. And so it was a transfer from the public coffers to private hands. But ultimately, the solution, I agree, isn't giving to private citizens. In fact, we should expand the public daycare facilities under the Social Security system, try to get more workers out of the informal sector into the formal sector so that they're part of Social Security and can enjoy that benefit. In fact, there's a daycare facility around the corner from me, and they have a big banner basically asking more people because they have plenty of spaces, but not enough people actually to fill them. And that, that I think that, more, there was a bad way of communicating is saying that, oh, let's have our grandmothers take care of things. And I think also it speaks to the fact that Lopez Obrador is an older man. He comes from an older generation and has that way of thinking. He's also proposed things like banning vaping and things like that, as if that's the kind of punitive solution, right? There are certainly spaces where I disagree, but one of the benefits of Mexico is that he's constitutionally limited from seeking a second term. That's why he didn't run for re-election. And Claudia comes from a similar generation, but she is a little bit younger, has fresher ideas. One thing that I would highlight, people always talk about, oh, is she just going to replicate everything that he does? Is it just going to be, AMLO part 2? I think one place where we're definitely going to see a shift in policy is that she was actually a member of the climate change panel that won a Nobel Prize. So she's an expert on climate change. And so there is a large expectation that she's going to shift away from the emphasis that Lopez Obrador had on fossil fuel extraction and more towards a green economy. The problem with that, again, right? Like people say that, oh, Lopez Obrador, he's not interested in green energy. He probably isn't. I mean, we can look at the record for it, but also, these whole so-called green energy initiatives that came in the previous regimes, same thing. These were sweetheart deals about moving money from the public sector into the private sector. The utility company was obligated to have to buy energy from these private green, quote unquote, energy firms first. And so that's not actually to benefit of the country. There was a really good article that came out recently. I'll forget the author of it, but basically making the argument I actually think is way more convincing. What is a better way to actually implement green policy? Dropping incentives to private companies that they will hopefully take up, or mandating a publicly owned state-run entity to actually do it. And I think it's right to expect, and if she doesn't do it, to demand that Claudia actually implement on this. She's someone who knows the issue, and so she can't claim ignorance on this.
We're hopeful about that, but at the same time, yesterday we were a group of friends, journalist colleagues, were trying to analyze the first speech that Claudia Sheinbaum did. And it was pretty much exactly the same thing that Andrés Manuel López Obrador did 6 years ago. And I'm not being this kind of people, the guy that says it is exactly, she's just copying it now. It was very, very, very alike. And now, 6 years after, things that Andrés Manuel said, like, I'm not going to interfere in the justice system, after seeing how he tried to interfere in the justice system, he was trying to move his pieces to get power into it, to put people like Lenia Batres as in the Supreme Court. Lenia Batres, that happens to be the sister of the city mayor, and that happens to be the sister of another deputy, and that has been self-called the minister of the people. I don't know if we can still believe in that, and I understand people criticizing Claudia. What also is something that will be very interesting in the following years, the following months, is the way we end up believing that we end up like supporting the way she works, or keep on criticizing, because the polarization process that has been part, and you may not deny this, Jose Luis. Every single day, the president takes not only 2 hours, he takes sometimes 4 hours to talk about the country. He has an amazing radio show, an amazing TV show. And he's been...
What's it called again? It's like, it's kind of like Chavez did this too, right?
Yeah, it's very simple. In fact, he's the second most popular Spanish YouTube program. Yes. That's how much people watch him. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we cannot blame him to say Mr. Obrador polarized the country. That's disgustingly false. He's not the one that said, there's the rich people and the Naco people, because that's a terrible adjective. I guess I have explained you in the past, Katie, what means the connotations about calling Naco to someone, but it's the poor people there. But he came here, and one of the first things that he did, he was like, these are the fifís, these are the good people, del pueblo bueno. And then the fifis are those guys and women with that have money, and the rich people. But the real rich people in the country, you know, they have been having the same contracts that they used to have. Mr. Slim, Carlos Slim, the richest man in the world, he's friends with the president. He was the first one invited to the first trip in the Tren Maya. So that is kind of a different speech. That sometimes he says something and something else happens. If you criticize the president, then you are part of the evil media. The evil media that is like against him totally. And as you may know me, and I hope that Jose Luis is aware about it, like there's a lot of different new young journalists that we're not part of that, you know, and that we're not doing exactly that, but we're considered exactly like that. But that not only happens to media, it also happens to people. We have been experiencing the way, even though again the position is this is a dictatorship. We're not a dictatorship. We're not but we're still the country where journalists are killed. you know
Yeah.
we're still a country with more than 100,000 disappeared people. And the way the president manages the narrative about that, it is not only something that you can admire if you admire the way people talk and the way people make speeches and rhetoric, but it's something that actually can be very scary for many of us. Because if Claudia Sheinbaum continues with that policy of not answering frontally to things, like she didn't answer, if she's going to be investigating the president's sons, she said something like, for example, the link that she has to the Panama Papers. She said in the national debate, no, that's a complete lie, and she smiled to the camera. And then one day after, she says, oh yes, I mean, it's my grandma. She received some money, and she never told us, but she has something in the Panama Papers. She has something in the Virgin Islands. And then you say, okay, what am I going to do? Are we going to believe completely in what the president says if we have 6 years of lies, 6 years of polarization over the previous polarization? There are a lot of questions about Claudia Sheinbaum that we'll need to answer, and we'll need to analyze, because it is not only about being Mexico's president. It's about how we're going to be dealing with the fact that Trump may be your next president, that there are elections in Europe, and that there's a more complicated situation in the world rather than believing her or not.
The polarization debate, I think, it's a difficult one to handle, because I think, you know, there are real differences. There are very deep
Totally.
class differences in this society, right? I mean, we can talk a bit about the oligarchs, and it's true. Many of the billionaires in Mexico continue to accumulate wealth under López Obrador. If I were going to criticize him, I think what's one of the things that we should have gone further in terms of that. But even the way that some of his initiatives were treated by these same oligarchs, I think it's pretty instructive. For example, we have Ricardo Salinas Pliego. He is one of the wealthiest men in Mexico. He's a libertarian, or at least claims to be, and he advocates these kinds of, libertarian right-wing positions. But he owns a major bank called Banco Azteca. He owns
ADM40
station.
where I work.
Yeah,
Actually.
and so one of the things that López Obrador did, he actually promised that he wasn't going to raise taxes, and he actually didn't. The only thing he did do was actually charge the taxes that were actually there. Before basically the tax entity would write them off and saying, or defer them years down the road. And what he said is, no, that practice ends, you're going to have to charge. And as a result, Salinas Pliego, every time that he gets into the headlines because of the tax issue, he'll dispatch his news anchors to attack the government on TV Azteca, right? And so there are very much class interests here that I think are being revealed. Certainly the polarization is something I think arguably did happen. There is kind of an us and them. But when we're talking about the bloc that supports López Obrador, Morena, and now Claudia Sheinbaum, I think it's also really important to pay attention to the election results, right? There's clearly public support for this project. It's overwhelmingly, right? And it's interesting that Miguel is talking about, is Claudia Sheinbaum going to be evasive in terms of some of her responses? I mean, at this point, they don't even have to negotiate with the opposition. What are they going to do with that? I think that's a more interesting question. Are they going to use that to do a fiscal reform, right? That's a hot potato. Are they actually going to do increase taxes on that, or are they going to use it in order to kind of marginalize the minority parties at this point? My hope is that they leverage this massive election victory to continue the most positive aspects of the transformation, the things that are actually delivering real results for people.